The billionaire returned home early and was shocked to find his black maid teaching his son. The scene Robert Williams encountered when he quietly opened the door to the library of his Beverly Hills mansion left him completely paralyzed. There was Grace, the 35-year-old woman he had hired to clean his house just 2 months earlier, sitting on the floor next to his 8-year-old son Tyler, but she wasn't cleaning. She was teaching math using colored blocks with a methodology Robert had never seen before. If you have 5 green blocks and you need to divide them equally among 3 friends, what happens? Grace asked with infinite patience while Tyler manipulated the objects with total concentration. There's 1 block left, exclaimed the boy, beaming. But I can give a little piece to each friend. Robert held his breath. His son, diagnosed with learning difficulties and costing a fortune in sessions with specialists, was genuinely excited about math for the first time in his life. Grace smiled in that way that only true teachers know how to do. Exactly, this is called division with a remainder. And it shows that things don't always divide up perfectly. But there's always a creative solution. That was when Robert decided to interrupt. What the hell is going on here? Tyler's smile vanished instantly. Grace stood up calmly, showing no surprise or fear. A strange reaction for a maid caught out of her duties. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. Tyler was having trouble with his homework, and Grace paused, her eyes revealing something Robert couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't submission. It was almost pity. You were hired to clean, not to teach. How dare you interfere with my son's education without permission? Robert felt his voice rise. Tyler tried to defend Grace, but Robert sent him to his room immediately. Alone with the maid, he continued, I think you'd better know your place in this house. Grace nodded silently, but there was something in her eyes, a disturbing serenity, as if she were keeping a secret too powerful to reveal at that moment. Of course, Mr. Williams. I apologize for overstepping my bounds, she replied, beginning to gather up the colored blocks Tyler had left scattered about. But Robert noticed something strange. Grace didn't seem nervous or remorseful. In fact, she handled those teaching materials with a professional familiarity that didn't make sense for a simple cleaning lady. As she put the blocks away, Robert saw something that intrigued him. Grace automatically organized the materials into specific pedagogical sequences, an action that revealed deep technical knowledge of teaching methodologies. Grace, he called, curiosity overcoming irritation. Where did you learn these techniques? She paused for a second before answering YouTube. Mr. Williams, the internet teaches a lot these days, but Robert knew enough people to know when someone was lying. And Grace wasn't exactly lying. She was omitting something much bigger, that night. As Tyler went to bed earlier than usual, visibly disappointed by the abrupt end to his fun lesson, Robert couldn't stop thinking, in 2 months, Grace had transformed the atmosphere of his home in a way he couldn't explain. What bothered him wasn't just that he had caught the maid teaching his son. It was the way she had done it with a naturalness and competence that suggested previous professional experience. And there was something else that was disturbing. Tyler had shown more progress in 30 minutes with Grace than in months of expensive therapy with Dr. Richardson, California's most renowned learning disability specialist. If you're enjoying this story of prejudice and unexpected discoveries, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what Robert was about to discover about Grace's past would completely change his perspective on who was really in his house and why she had accepted a job so far below her qualifications. The next morning, Robert couldn't concentrate on any of his meetings. Over breakfast, Tyler had asked 3 times when Grace would be back to help him with the phone numbers, and each question was like a stab in Robert's conscience. Daddy, why can't Grace teach me anymore? Tyler insisted, idly stirring the cereal that cost more than most people's weekly salary. Because she has other duties. Tyler, Dr. Richardson is your tutor, remember? Robert replied curtly, but inside something bothered him deeply. Dr. Richardson cost $300 an hour, and Tyler always left the sessions more frustrated than when he entered. Grace had achieved in half an hour what the specialist had not been able to achieve in months, around 10 in the morning. Robert called his executive assistant, Jennifer. I need all the information I can get on our housekeeper, Grace Thompson, work history, references, everything. Any specific problem, Mr. Williams? Jennifer asked, already typing notes. Just delayed due diligence, Robert lied. The truth was that his curiosity was turning into obsession. 2 hours later, Jennifer returned with a file that was too thin for someone 35 years old, sir. It's strange. Grace Thompson has impeccable references from the last 2 families she worked for. But before 2019, it's as if she didn't exist professionally. Robert leafed through the documents. Everything was very clean, very sanitized. What about her education? High school in Chicago, according to the documents. Nothing else. But Robert knew enough people to know when something didn't add up. That afternoon, he decided to test Grace directly. He came home early again, finding her cleaning the library, exactly where the incident had happened the day before. Tyler was at school. Grace, can I talk to you? She turned calmly, unhurried, unnerved again. That unsettling serenity, of course, Mr. Williams. I've been thinking about yesterday. You demonstrated very specific pedagogical knowledge. Where did you actually learn these techniques? Grace paused her cleaning, but her eyes remained fixed on his. As I said, the internet has many educational resources these days. YouTube doesn't teach advanced Montessori methodology, Grace. You organize those blocks according to pedagogical principles that cost thousands of dollars to learn at universities. It was then that Robert saw something that baffled him. Grace smiled, not a submissive or nervous smile. A smile that carried knowledge, experience, and something Robert couldn't name. Have you researched Montessori methods, Mr. Williams? The question caught him off guard. Robert Williams, CEO of a technology company valued at billions, was being questioned by his housekeeper about knowledge he had Googled in a hurry an hour earlier. Well, it's my responsibility to know the educational methods applied to my son. Of course, Grace nodded, returning to her cleaning. It's an important responsibility. Her tone wasn't sarcastic, but there was something there that made Robert feel small, as if she knew exactly what he had done, desperately researched to try to catch her in the act. That night, Robert called his friend Marcus, the human resources director of an executive recruitment firm. Marcus, I need a favor. Can you do a more thorough background check on a maid? Robert, man, that's a little paranoid. What trouble has she caused? None. It's just she seems too qualified for the job. Marcus laughed. You're complaining about having a competent maid. The world has turned upside down. It's not that, it's just that. Robert paused, realizing how difficult it would be to explain without sounding completely crazy. Just do me this favor. 3 days later, Marcus called back with information that left Robert even more confused. Man, your maid is a ghost. Grace Thompson has only officially existed since 2019. Before that, nothing. No credit card, no address, no job. It's as if she was born at the age of 30. Is that possible? Theoretically, yes. Some people change their names for witness protection, complicated divorces, or Marcus paused. Robert, why are you investigating this woman so much? Robert hung up without answering because he didn't have a logical answer. Or rather, he had an answer he didn't want to admit. Grace intrigued him in a way that challenged all his carefully constructed prejudices. The following evening during dinner, Tyler asked a question that cut through the air like a knife. Dad, why don't you like Grace? I like her, Tyler. I just think everyone should do their job. But she helps me understand things. Dr. Richardson talks to me like I'm stupid. Robert nearly choked on his wine. Tyler, Dr. Richardson is one of the best specialists in the country. He's boring and makes me feel bad. Grace makes me feel smart. That night, Robert stayed up late. For the first time in years, he questioned whether his certainties about competence, education, and value were as solid as he had always believed. Grace Thompson was a maid who seemed to have the knowledge of a graduate professor, who didn't officially exist before 2019, who taught better than expensive experts, and who looked at him as if she knew exactly who he really was beneath the expensive suits and impressive titles. What Robert didn't know yet was that every question he asked, every investigation he started was being carefully watched by someone who had learned to recognize the signs of a powerful man trying to find ways to destroy what he couldn't control. And Grace Thompson, or whoever she really was several steps ahead of him, waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal that some secrets are too powerful to remain buried forever. Robert's obsession with unmasking Grace had turned into something dangerous over the next 2 weeks. He began to act like a man losing control. First, he installed additional cameras around the house for security. Then, he started coming home at random times, always hoping to catch Grace in some suspicious activity. What he found was even more frustrating. An impeccable maid who did her job with quiet efficiency. Jennifer, I want you to hire a private investigator. Someone discreet but efficient, Robert ordered during a company video conference. Sir, wouldn't that be a little excessive for a maid? Robert hung up without answering. Jennifer wouldn't understand. None of his privileged white employees would understand the feeling of being intellectually outmatched by someone who should be in a lower position. The investigator, Mitchell Torres, returned with even more intriguing information a week later. Mr. Williams, Grace Thompson isn't just a ghost before 2019. She legally changed her name. Her previous name was sealed by court order, something that only happens in cases of witness protection or victims of domestic violence. Keep investigating. I want to know who she really is, sir. This could be very expensive and it could be illegal depending on how deep we dig. I don't care about the price, meanwhile. Grace had noticed every new camera, every unexpected arrival, every investigative glance. But contrary to Robert's expectations, she showed no signs of nervousness. In fact, she seemed to be waiting for exactly that. One afternoon, when Robert arrived unannounced, he found Grace in the library, not cleaning, but reading one of the books on the shelf, Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Fra in English. "Grace, that book is there for decoration. It's a complex university edition," Robert said, trying to sound casual. Grace calmly closed the book, marking the page where she had stopped. "It's a fascinating read, Mr. Williams. Fra talks about how education can be used both to oppress and to liberate." Robert felt the blood rush to his head. "Where did you learn about Paulo Fra?" "YouTube has everything these days," Grace replied in her usual calm tone. But this time, Robert detected something different in her eyes. It wasn't submission, it was almost amusement that night. Robert did something he would later recognize as his greatest display of prejudice and paranoia. He called Dr. Richardson. "Doctor, I need you to assess whether my housekeeper is negatively interfering with Tyler's educational development." Dr. Richardson, who charged $300 per session and had an ego proportional to the price, was visibly offended. "Mr. Williams, a housekeeper with no formal qualifications, should not even be involved in the educational process of a child with Tyler's specific needs." "Exactly. I want official documentation that this interference is harmful." What Robert didn't know was that Grace had anticipated exactly this move, 2 days after Dr. Richardson's visit, during which he had interrogated Tyler about his alternative study methods as if they were dangerous practices. Grace received a call. "Dr. Grace Mitchell." The voice on the other end was familiar and warm. "Dr. Peterson, I wasn't expecting your call so soon, Doctor." James Peterson was the director of the Harvard MIT Educational Institute, one of the most prestigious educational research organizations in the country, and he had been Grace's doctoral advisor before she became Grace Thompson. "Grace, I saw the reports on innovative methodologies in Beverly Hills. Small educational circle, isn't it? I recognized your work immediately." Grace smiled for the first time in weeks. "Is it time?" "More than time. The Institute has approved your official return. We have a position waiting for you, a substantial research budget, and, well, some influential people who would very much like to meet the real Dr. Mitchell." That night, Grace did something she had avoided for 2 years. She opened the laptop she kept in the back room and accessed her academic emails for the first time since changing her identity. 347 unread messages, invitations to international conferences, offers of collaboration, requests for consulting from educational systems in 3 different countries. Her article on inclusive methodologies for children with special needs had been cited 1,247 times since its publication. Her research on socioeconomic bias in elite educational environments had become required reading at 15 universities. Grace began typing an email to Dr. Peterson, but stopped. First, she needed to verify that her suspicions about Robert Williams were correct. A quick search revealed what she had hoped to find. Robert Williams had been one of the main financiers of the campaign that resulted in funding cuts for public schools in low-income districts 3 years ago. His foundation, the Williams Education Initiative, exclusively funded elite private schools. Even more interesting, Dr. Richardson, Tyler's expert, was on the payroll of an organization that Robert supported financially, an organization that advocated for educational meritocracy, a fancy euphemism for keeping poor and black children away from quality educational opportunities. Grace smiled again, but this time it was different. It was the smile of someone who had just found the final piece of a very complex puzzle. She opened a new folder on her computer and began compiling documents not just about her own identity and qualifications, but about Robert Williams, his company, his educational initiatives, and the network of people he funded to maintain the status quo. Tyler had been just the catalyst, but the real issue was much bigger. How many children like Tyler were harmed every day by men like Robert Williams, who believed that competence and intelligence were privileges that should be distributed according to skin color and bank account? The next morning, Grace woke up earlier than usual. She made coffee as usual, tidied up the house as usual, but there was something different about her movements. A new precision, a confidence that came from someone who had finally decided to stop hiding. When Robert came down for breakfast, he found Tyler doing something he hadn't seen in months. The boy was smiling as he willingly solved math problems. "Grace taught me a new way of thinking about numbers, Dad. Want to see?" Robert looked at Grace, who was calmly preparing lunch in the kitchen. She didn't look back, but he could swear he saw a slight smile at the corner of her mouth. At that moment, 2 things became clear to Robert. First, he had completely underestimated Grace Thompson. Second, whatever she was planning, it was already too late for him to stop her. What Robert couldn't have imagined was that in less than 48 hours, the name Dr. Grace Mitchell would be in the country's leading educational newspapers, and his own reputation would be questioned by people far more powerful than him. For 2 years, Grace had hidden behind the identity of a maid, but some secrets are too powerful to remain buried forever, especially when the person who holds them finally decides that the time has come to show the world who she really is. The morning that would change everything began with Robert receiving an unexpected call from Mitchell Torres. "The private investigator, Mr. Williams. I need to see you urgently. I found out who Grace Thompson is, sir. You won't believe what I found." An hour later, Robert was sitting in his office, leafing through a dossier that made his blood run cold. Photographs, certificates, academic articles, international awards. Everything pointed to a truth that was impossible to accept. Dr. Grace Elizabeth Mitchell Torres read aloud, Ph.D. in Education from Harvard, Postdoctoral Fellow in Inclusive Education at MIT, world-renowned expert in child cognitive development and methodologies for children with special needs. Robert held a photo of Grace receiving an award from the United Nations for excellence in transformative education, wearing an elegant navy blue blazer surrounded by diplomats and renowned academics. "That's impossible. She's a maid. She cleans my house. Mr. Williams, she legally changed her name in 2019 after Torres paused clearly. Uncomfortable after being forced to leave her position at Stanford University because of external pressures related to her research on racial discrimination in the educational system." The next photo in the dossier showed Grace, Dr. Mitchell, lecturing to a packed audience, a presentation on how socioeconomic bias destroys the potential of gifted children. Robert felt nausea rising in his throat. External pressures from whom? Torres slid another document across the table. From a group of conservative influencers in education funded by, well, you're on the list of major funders. Mr. Williams, Robert's world collapsed. For 2 years, he had treated one of the most respected educators in the country like a domestic servant, a woman who had been forced into anonymity by people he himself had funded. At that very moment, his secretary, Jennifer, rushed into the office. "Mr. Williams, something strange is happening. Several journalists are trying to contact you about a press conference that..." Robert's phone rang. It was his wife. "Linda, hysterical, Robert, turn on CNN now." Robert grabbed the remote with trembling hands. The screen showed a packed auditorium at the Harvard MIT Institute of Education. On stage, a familiar woman spoke to hundreds of academics, journalists, and activists. It was Grace, but not the Grace he knew. This Grace wore an elegant professional outfit, her hair neatly styled, her posture confident. Next to her, a banner read, Dr. Grace Mitchell, Official Return Conference on Systemic Discrimination in Elite Education. "My name is Dr. Grace Elizabeth Mitchell." Her voice echoed through the auditorium via the sound system. "For 2 years, I lived under a false identity, working as a maid for a family in Beverly Hills. Today, I am here to tell you why it was necessary for me to hide, and what I learned about prejudice by living on the other side." Robert felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Grace continued on the screen. "The man who employed me, Mr. Robert Williams, CEO of Technova Solutions, has spent the last few months trying to unmask me. He installed extra cameras, hired investigators, questioned my qualifications to teach his own son, a brilliant boy who thrived on educational methods that cost hundreds of dollars an hour with specialists, but which he received for free from his maid. The camera focused on a slideshow, financial documents, donations, correspondence between Robert and organizations that promoted educational meritocracy. While Mr. Williams was investigating me, I was investigating him. I discovered that over the past 5 years, he had donated more than $2 million to organizations that systematically reduce funding for public schools in low-income communities. The next image literally took Robert's breath away. It was a photo of himself smiling, presenting a symbolic check to the Williams Educational Excellence Foundation, the same organization that had pushed for Grace's dismissal from Stanford. "Mr. Williams directly funded the campaign that forced me to leave my academic career," Grace stated calmly. "And for 2 years, while I cleaned his house and cared for his son, he tried to disqualify me based on the same prejudices he had funded against me." The auditorium was completely silent. Grace opened a folder and took out a series of documents. "I have here transcripts of conversations between Mr. Williams and Dr. Richardson, the specialist who was treating Tyler. Conversations where they discussed how to prevent an unqualified maid from interfering in the educational process of a child who was clearly benefiting from that interference." Robert's voice came out in crystal-clear audio recording. "Doctor, I need you to assess whether my maid is negatively interfering with Tyler's educational development. I want official documentation that this interference is harmful." Jennifer was pale. Torres stood up uncomfortably. Robert Williams, a respected billionaire, was being publicly exposed as a man who financed educational discrimination, while personally benefiting from the results of that same discrimination. Grace continued. The most ironic thing is that Tyler, Mr. Williams' son, has made more progress in 2 months with methodologies I developed at Harvard than he has in years of expensive therapy. But his father would rather pay hundreds of dollars an hour to an incompetent specialist than recognize that a black woman might have something valuable to offer. Comparative charts appeared on the screen. Tyler's progress with Dr. Richardson versus his progress with Grace's methods. The difference was striking. Robert's phone wouldn't stop ringing. His company, his investors, his wife, reporters. Grace held up one last document. I have a proposal for Mr. Williams and others who fund educational discrimination disguised as excellence. Use your resources to build, not to destroy. Invest in true quality education for all children, not just those born with privilege. She paused, looking directly at the camera as if she could see Robert through the screen. And Tyler, if you're watching, know that your intelligence and potential never depended on the color of your teacher's skin or the price of your lessons. You are brilliant because you are you, and any true educator would recognize that immediately. The auditorium erupted in applause. Robert Williams, the man who had tried to humiliate and disqualify Grace Thompson, was watching Dr. Grace Mitchell receive a standing ovation from some of the most respected academics in the world. As the credits rolled across the screen, showing Grace's impressive credentials and quotes from her most influential articles, Robert realized a devastating truth. He had spent 2 years investigating and trying to destroy exactly the kind of person he should have been supporting. A woman who had dedicated her life to helping children like his own son. An educator who had been silenced by prejudices that he himself had funded. A world-renowned expert whom he had treated like a servant, and now, as his phone rang incessantly with calls from journalists wanting his side of the story, Robert Williams finally understood that he had lost much more than just a competent employee. He had lost his reputation, his moral credibility, and possibly the transformative education that could have changed his son's life forever. But the question that remained unanswered as the conference continued to be broadcast live to millions of people was devastatingly simple. Would it be possible for a man who had financed discrimination for years to find a way to repair the damage he had caused? Or are some bridges permanently burned by the very fire of prejudice that we helped to ignite? 6 months after the conference that changed everything, the world had become a very different place for everyone involved. Robert Williams lost not only his reputation, but also his company. Investors withdrew funds en masse after the public exposure, and Technova Solutions was sold for a fraction of its original value. Discrimination lawsuits from various educational organizations he had harmed left him financially ruined. Dr. Richardson had his license revoked after an investigation revealed years of unethical practices funded by discriminatory groups. His career as an expert ended overnight. Grace, on the other hand, flourished in unimaginable ways. The Harvard-MIT Institute created a special chair in her name, Dr. Grace Mitchell Chair for Inclusive Education Innovation. Universities around the world competed for her lectures and consulting services. More importantly, Tyler became the first student in the experimental program Grace developed for children with special needs. Within 6 months, he not only reached the educational level of his age group, but significantly surpassed it. Dr. Grace, Tyler said during one of his sessions, now officially held at the UCLA Educational Lab. Was my father really prejudiced? Grace smiled with the same infinite patience as always. Your father was afraid, Tyler. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of admitting he was wrong. But people can change when they finally understand the real cost of their prejudices. Robert, watching from the lab window, now as an authorized visitor, no longer as a controlling father, heard every word. He had lost everything. His company, his fortune, his reputation. But for the first time in years, he saw his son genuinely happy and thriving. May I come in? He asked timidly. Grace nodded. Tyler was telling me about the project you two are developing. It was true. Robert had started volunteering in public schools, using his business experience to help underserved communities, not for publicity or public redemption, but because he finally understood that competence and human value do not depend on address or bank account. Dr. Grace taught me that being truly smart is knowing when you were wrong, Tyler explained proudly. At that moment, Robert realized he had gained something far more valuable than billions. His son's genuine respect and the opportunity to build a legacy based on justice, not privilege. Grace had proven that the best revenge is not to destroy those who harm you, but to build something so great that it becomes impossible to ignore its value. Her maid had become one of the most influential educators in the country. transforming not only individual lives, but entire educational policies, Dr. Grace Mitchell's story became a case study in universities about how systemic prejudice wastes extraordinary talent, and how true excellence always finds its way into the light. If this story of overcoming adversity and justice touched your heart, subscribe,